In a pivotal era, when the Roman Republic teetered on the brink of collapse like a house of cards, a man emerged whose name is forever etched in the annals of history: Publius Cornelius Scipio. This remarkable individual not only saved the state from imminent disaster, but also paid an immense price for his greatness and triumph. The cognomen Africanus was not inherited, but bestowed upon him as a symbol of his brilliant victories on the African continent. It was Scipio's destiny to break the military genius of Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general whose successes had plunged Rome into a vortex of humiliation and fear, his army sowing terror across the entire Apennine Peninsula. Scipio triumphed over him not merely through military might, but also due to his keen intellect, unyielding will, and strategic acumen, which surpassed even that of the Carthaginian strategist himself. However, Scipio's triumph was not unblemished. In the political climate of Rome at that time, no individual could long bask in the glow of glory without arousing envy and ill will. The Senate, consumed by jealousy over his growing popularity and fearing his influence, transformed public acclaim into suspicion and gratitude for saving the Republic into accusations of betrayal. Scipio's life is not merely the narrative of an invincible general. It is a tale of a young aristocrat who dared to defy fate, restored lost pride to his people, and ignited a beacon of hope at a moment when all seemed lost. It is also a portrait of a republic unable to tolerate the greatness of its hero, ultimately banishing him. The story of Scipio Africanus's rise, triumph, and bitter fate serves as a poignant reminder that even the greatest feats do not always find recognition in one's homeland. The Roman Republic found itself in its deepest crisis. In southern Italy, on the plains of Cannae, Hannibal Barca executed a strategic maneuver that forever entered the annals of military history as a stroke of genius. Despite being outnumbered, he managed to encircle the Roman army and inflict a crushing defeat, annihilating over 50,000 legionaries. This catastrophe plunged Rome into a state of shock and paralysis. Many believed the Republic's demise was inevitable. So profound was the wound inflicted. However, amidst the universal fear, confusion, and despair, a leader unexpectedly emerged from this tragedy: Publius Cornelius Scipio. He was merely 20 years old, held neither high rank nor formal command, but he possessed what the survivors so desperately lacked: the gift of leadership. When some soldiers, shaken by the scale of the slaughter, spoke of surrender or abandoning the fight, Scipio, unable to bear it, burst into the assembly with a drawn sword in hand. Addressing the gods, he swore an oath: "By Jupiter, I shall never betray Rome, and with this very sword I shall punish anyone who dares to do so." This act was more than just a threat. It was a rallying cry to patriotism, a spark of hope that ignited in Rome's darkest hour. Although Scipio was very young, it was at this moment that a great general was born, a man destined to become a legend. The transformation into a distinguished leader does not occur in sheltered conditions, but in the crucible of trials. While Rome desperately contained the Carthaginian onslaught, a no less significant battle was unfolding on distant frontiers in the disputed Spanish territories. There, Roman legions were under the command of Publius Cornelius Scipio's father and uncle, who for many months had attempted to halt the Carthaginian war machine, disrupt their logistics, and secure the loyalty of their few allies. However, fate decreed otherwise, and tragedy struck. The Scipio brothers fell victim to betrayal by local Celtiberians, allies whom they had blindly trusted. In an unequal struggle against superior Carthaginian forces, commanded by Hasdrubal Barca, they lost their lives. This was a devastating blow to Roman ambitions in the region. For the young Publius, this news came as a profound shock. He not only lost his father and uncle overnight, but also faced the threat of losing his entire family legacy, which he had not yet fully inherited. Rome was plunged into a state of paralysis. No one wished to take responsibility for this doomed campaign. Senators hesitated, and experienced generals remained silent. It was certain doom. It was at this critical juncture that Scipio, barely 25 years old, appeared before the Senate. He presented himself not as an arrogant youth, but as a man who had grasped that, even in the deepest sorrow, there is meaning. Lacking any general's experience, he requested to be entrusted with command of the remnants of the Roman forces in Spain. In the face of universal silence and a lack of willing candidates, the Senate, seeing no other option, was compelled to place this heavy burden upon him. In 210 BC, filled with determination and hope, Scipio departed for Spain as proconsul. He commanded an army, small in number and demoralized by failures. He had no grand victories, no accolades, and no guarantees of success behind him. He was driven solely by an unyielding desire for vengeance for the loss of his family, a yearning to restore Rome's lost honor, and a determination to halt Carthage's triumphant march. He realized he was alone in his endeavor, yet believed that victory would not merely be a military triumph, but the harbinger of a new era for Rome. New Carthage was not just another settlement on the map. It was Carthage's brilliant jewel in Spain, a vital naval and military base, a command center, an arsenal, a treasury, and a symbol of power. Taking this city meant inflicting a devastating blow not only tactically, but also psychologically. However, storming such an impregnable fortress with an as-yet unformed army seemed like a madcap adventure. But Scipio thought differently. He did not aim for a protracted war or head-on confrontations with the three scattered Carthaginian armies operating in the region. His brilliant mind calculated the situation several steps ahead. The plan was to strike where the enemy least expected it, swiftly and with surgical precision. Thanks to secret information obtained from sailors from the allied city of Tarraco, Scipio discovered New Carthage's vulnerability, a northern lagoon that, during low tide, exposed a direct passage to the walls. This was a chance requiring perfect coordination and execution. On that fateful day, as New Carthage's defenders concentrated all their forces on repelling a massive attack by land and sea, Scipio, like an experienced strategist, ordered a portion of his legions to execute a daring maneuver, to cross the lagoon precisely at low tide. Fearlessly treading through the viscous mud like shadows, the Roman warriors made their way to the city's inner fortifications, choosing the least defended flank for their assault. What had seemed unthinkable just hours before came to pass. New Carthage fell under the onslaught of the Roman war machine. This was not just a victory, but a triumph, complete and unconditional. Scipio not only breached the city walls, but also captured an enormous arsenal of weapons, a powerful naval fleet, untold treasures, and secret archives containing Carthage's secrets. This victory not only bolstered his own authority and raised the morale of the Roman legions, but also gave Rome a strategic advantage in the war. Scipio proved that Rome needed not endless resources or time for victory, but a leader with strategic vision and capable of bold decisions. Carthage felt a crushing blow. For the first time since the bloody war began, fear had shifted to the other side. However, after taking New Carthage, Scipio did not succumb to the temptation to rest on his laurels. He fully understood that 3 formidable Carthaginian armies, led by the Barcid brothers, Hasdrubal, Mago, and Hasdrubal Gisco, were still active on the Iberian Peninsula. Together they represented an almost insurmountable force, but individually they were vulnerable. Scipio rejected a strategy of attritional warfare, opting instead for a series of lightning-fast, surgically precise strikes against the enemy's most vulnerable points. His goal was to prevent the 3 armies from uniting, to separate them, isolate them, and defeat them one by one, thereby stripping Carthage of its last hopes for victory. While Hasdrubal Barca was leaving Spanish lands, aiming to transfer reinforcements to his brother Hannibal in Italy, Scipio's attention was turned towards the 2 other Carthaginian generals. However, before that could happen, a dramatic event transpired. Roman legions intercepting Hasdrubal's army on its march northwards inflicted a crushing defeat upon it at the Metaurus River. Hasdrubal's head, bloodied and devoid of all glory, was sent to Hannibal's camp. This gruesome gift served as an unequivocal message. The Roman Republic no longer trembled before the Barcids, henceforth it hunted them. Meanwhile, Scipio continued his triumphant march through Spain. In the Grand Battle of Baecula, he thwarted the Carthaginians' plans for regrouping their forces. And when Mago and Hasdrubal Gisco finally decided to unite their armies, it was already too late. Scipio met them on the plain of Ilipa, near modern-day Seville. Despite the enemy's numerical superiority, the Roman army was better prepared and possessed a brilliant plan. Scipio deployed allied troops in the center and his battle-hardened legionaries on the flanks, a complete reversal of previous battles. At the start of the battle, the Carthaginians, confident in their strength, attacked the seemingly weak center. However, while they were bogged down in fighting, Scipio launched a lightning strike on the flanks, encircling the enemy, with a maneuver that completely shattered their battle formations. Carthage's local allies, losing faith in victory, began to desert. Fear gripped the Carthaginian army, and by the end of the day, it was virtually annihilated. This was not merely a victory, but the culmination of a military campaign planned with cold strategic precision, worthy of the greatest military geniuses. Scipio not only conquered Spain, he sealed the fate of the Carthaginian Empire. In Rome, it was gradually realized that a general had emerged among them whose equal had not been seen for several generations. Scipio triumphantly returned to Rome, like a hero from ancient legends. He had triumphed over the Barcid family in Spain, destroying their carefully constructed support system and depriving Carthage of its most valuable possession on the European continent. In the eyes of many Romans, his image rose to that of a savior, a deliverer from mortal threat. However, in Rome, where political intrigues were commonplace, glory often aroused not only admiration, but also suspicion. Although Scipio was greeted with honors, the Senate did not show him the due respect he undoubtedly deserved. He was permitted to hold the office of consul, even though he had not reached the stipulated age. But his charisma, the people's affection, and his almost divine stature aroused fears among the most ardent defenders of the Republic. To them, Scipio was not merely a triumphant general, but a potential dictator, aspiring to sole power. Among these zealous defenders of republican principles, a prominent figure was Marcus Porcius Cato, better known as Cato the Elder. Cato harbored deep distrust towards Scipio's refined lifestyle, his inclination towards foreign cultures, and above all, his growing political influence. For Cato, asceticism, strict discipline, and loyalty to Roman traditions were unshakable values. Scipio, with his fascination with Greek philosophy, lavish spectacles, and charismatic leadership, represented a direct threat to these ideals, embodying a type of ruler alien to the Roman spirit. The confrontation between Cato and Scipio escalated, reaching its zenith when the shadow of scandal fell upon the celebrated general's closest associate. Cato, seizing the opportunity, launched a public critique, accusing Scipio's inner circle of corruption and extravagance, aiming to undermine his authority and remove him from office. However, despite all efforts, Cato failed to achieve his goal. Scipio's popularity among the people remained unshaken. But Rome was no longer the same. The severe consequences of the Second Punic War left deep wounds in society, awakening dormant ambitions and a thirst for power. Influence gradually shifted from the Senate to triumphant generals, and Cato was determined to fight this trend to the very end. While the people hailed Scipio as Rome's savior, in the shadows, conspiracies ripened, foreshadowing his downfall. For in the Republic's political life, military triumphs are quickly forgotten, while enmities and personal grievances endure. Rome understood perfectly that expelling the Carthaginians from the Iberian Peninsula was merely a half measure. To permanently end the Carthaginian threat, it was necessary to strike at the very heart of the enemy. Scipio, more than anyone, realized this and proposed a daring plan to transfer the war to the African continent, into Carthage's very lair. The Senate hesitated, struck not so much by the lack of justification for such a decision as by the boldness and scale of the concept. Scipio aimed not just to invade Africa, but to force Hannibal himself, who had tormented Italy for years, to return home to defend it. This was a risky but brilliant strategic move. Scipio's military strategy was meticulously planned, and Sicily became his secure staging ground for preparing the army for the decisive battle. This campaign was exceptional, for nothing less than dominion over the entire Mediterranean was at stake. After landing in Africa, Scipio's forces crushed the Carthaginian vanguard with astonishing ease, which plunged Carthage into a state of deep panic. At this critical juncture, the inevitable occurred. Hannibal himself was recalled from his distant campaigns. Two legendary figures of military history were destined to clash. On one side, the unyielding defender of Carthage; on the other, the audacious conqueror of Spain. Both generals realized that their impending encounter would be decisive for the fates of their civilizations, a moment of truth that would determine the outcome of a long struggle. On 19th of October 202 BC, the Battle of Zama erupted just outside the walls of Carthage. Hannibal, as if holding a final ace up his sleeve, led a formidable army onto the battlefield, bolstered by a fearsome force of 80 war elephants. However, Scipio, maintaining his composure, met this challenge with cold confidence. He understood that the outcome of the battle depended not so much on brute force as on the ability to control the situation. Displaying iron discipline, he ordered his troops to form corridors in their battle lines when the elephants charged. The animals, disoriented by the silence of the closed ranks, the gleam of armor, and funneled into a trap, charged into these corridors without causing significant harm. Once surrounded, the elephants were mercilessly destroyed, which decided the outcome of the battle and the entire war. Then a demonstration of military strategy unfolded. Scipio, like a diligent student, had mastered Hannibal's tactics, transforming his respect for the enemy into a powerful weapon. Within a few hours, the Carthaginian army was defeated, leaving over 20,000 dead and 15,000 captured on the battlefield. Carthage, having suffered a crushing defeat, was forced to accept humiliating peace terms, relinquishing its fleet, colonies, and all imperial claims. Hannibal, defeated definitively for the first time, forever abandoned hopes of creating a Carthaginian empire. Rome became the undisputed master of the Mediterranean, and Scipio, its hero. However, triumph, as often happens in Rome, proved fleeting, for even the greatest do not escape the envy and intrigues inherent in power. Etched in collective memory is the image 80 African elephants, like a living storm, charging with roars and thunder towards the Roman legions, raising clouds of dust. This was Hannibal's last trump card, his most formidable weapon. Each of these enormous animals could obliterate an entire unit with a single stride. They were moving mountains, armed with tusks and topped with towers, embodying pure hatred. However, Scipio, displaying coolness, did not succumb to the terrifying spectacle. He understood that victory is achieved not only by force of arms, but also by cunning of mind. Knowing that elephants, despite their power, are susceptible to fear, he ordered his soldiers to meticulously polish their armor and helmets, so that the African sun would reflect dazzling glints from them. Furthermore, he arranged for military musicians to sound their trumpets and horns at the opportune moment. The objective was not to withstand the attack, but to disrupt it, preventing it from even beginning. At the decisive moment, when the formidable elephants crashed into the Roman legions, Rome's warriors displayed not brute force, but wonders of tactical discipline. Instead of a direct confrontation, they opened their ranks like a parting curtain, forming corridors through which the giant animals charged, meeting no resistance. Blinded by the gleam of armor, deafened by the clangor of weapons, and deprived of a clear target, the pachyderms lost their orientation. In confusion, they fled, some retreating, others in a panic, crashing into their own Carthaginian ranks, sowing chaos and destruction. And then, like a clap of thunder, the Roman counterattack followed. From the flanks, like steel pincers, the ranks of spearmen closed in, unleashing a hail of deadly spears upon the enemy. Under this onslaught, dozens of elephants collapsed to the ground, transforming into lifeless hulks. Of the 80 animals, only 11 escaped destruction. The rest lay on the battlefield like monumental symbols of a vanishing era. But this battle was not just a military victory, it was a triumph of composure, strategic genius, and the ability to control the situation. Scipio prevailed not through numerical superiority, but thanks to his ability to transform fear into a tactical advantage. After this battle, the Romans realized that there are no invincible monsters if one employs intelligence and cunning against them. And Scipio Africanus forever inscribed his name in history, not only as a great warrior, but also as a brilliant strategist whose exploits would live on through the ages. The Eternal City did not favor those who rose above the common populace, and Scipio Africanus, whose exploits resonated throughout the Mediterranean, was no exception. His triumphs had saved the Roman Republic, and his tactical mastery had brought Carthage to its knees. However, for many senators, his glory proved unbearable. Scipio's enemies, lying in wait after the war, bided their time for the opportune moment to strike. Cato the Elder, an indefatigable champion of old Republican principles, spearheaded this behind-the-scenes struggle. Not weapons were used, but public censure. Accusations of misappropriating war spoils after the victory over Antiochus III in Asia were leveled against Lucius Cornelius Scipio, the hero's brother. Scipio, offended by such dishonor, responded with pride worthy of his greatness. Right in the Roman Forum, before an astonished public, he consigned the financial reports of the campaign to flames. This audacious act delighted the people but simultaneously proved fatal to his political career. In Rome, defiance of the Senate was considered the gravest of crimes. This provocative gesture, despite all its boldness, was perceived as an act of excessive pride. Soon, the Scipio family found itself at the epicenter of tumultuous legal proceedings, burdened by fines and public humiliation. Lucius was found guilty, and Scipio himself was summoned to testify before the Senate on the auspicious day marking the anniversary of his triumphal victory at Zama. However, Scipio ignored the summons. Instead of appearing in court, he chose solitude and offered sacrifices to the gods, giving thanks for the victory that had turned the tide of history. His absence was perceived as a defiant challenge, the final straw that broke the patience of those who had long yearned for his downfall. The Senate decided to confiscate his property. Scipio found himself isolated, stripped of everything save his enduring glory and unyielding pride. He then chose voluntary exile. "I exile myself if my greatness becomes a burden to Rome," he declared, before leaving the city forever to settle at his villa in Liternum. There, far from the bustle of the forums, public gossip, and the ingratitude of his fellow citizens, he spent his final years, dedicating himself to literary work, agriculture, and reminiscing about past glories. For even the greatest of heroes can fall not by an enemy's blade, but by the envy of those who swore to defend the very homeland he had saved. Scipio Africanus was more than just a distinguished general. He fundamentally reshaped Rome's understanding of warfare, leadership, and power. His legacy, though clouded by exile and ingratitude, extends far beyond the battlefields, influencing generations to come. From a young age, Scipio understood that warfare was not merely a display of brute force. He masterfully employed intellect, psychological impact, and theatrical prowess as weapons as potent as any blade. He introduced innovative tactical approaches, mobility instead of cumbersome rigidity, cunning maneuvers instead of direct assaults, and strategic foresight instead of passive reactions to situations. At the Battle of Zama, he convincingly demonstrated that even the seemingly invincible Hannibal could be defeated, not by superior numbers, but by a profound understanding of the enemy's mind. In the political sphere, Scipio embodied the eternal struggle between charismatic reformers and an entrenched conservative system. He inspired genuine admiration among the populace, but simultaneously instilled fear among the senators. This was not because he harbored tyrannical ambitions, but because he represented the future, a bolder, more expansionist Rome, less susceptible to control by the old aristocratic families. His image became an inspiring example for subsequent generations. Prominent figures such as Julius Caesar, Pompey, and even Napoleon studied his history with reverence, for Scipio did not merely win battles. He instilled in his soldiers a belief in the impossible, teaching them that victory in war begins with a triumph of spirit, which is then secured on the battlefield. Nevertheless, Scipio paid a heavy price for his greatness. His military achievements were undeniable, but his political legacy remained ambiguous. Some saw him as a devoted savior of his homeland, others as a leader who too boldly challenged the very system that had elevated him to power. Yet inexorable time, like a supreme arbiter, elevated him above the voices of his detractors. In the annals of Rome, Publius Cornelius Scipio appeared not merely as a consul or a general. He was the very individual who managed to subdue Carthage, radically altered the geopolitical map of his era, and even in proud defeats left an indelible mark that no court of law could erase. Exiled but unbroken, the savior of Rome departed this world not with bitterness, but with his head held high. Retreating from political intrigues and public gossip, Scipio Africanus found solitude at his villa in Liternum, far from the city that had once lauded him as a hero. There, amidst picturesque nature, he spent his final days in peace and quiet. He deliberately withdrew from public life, becoming a country dweller, a philosopher of his own destiny. He devoted himself to writing memoirs, cultivating the land, and contemplating the burden of fame and the transience of power. Despite his voluntary exile, Scipio remained loyal to Rome until the end, though he denied it his presence. In a final act of pride and disillusionment, he bequeathed that his ashes should never rest in the city that had so easily forgotten him. Legend has it that his last words were, "Ungrateful homeland, you shall not have my bones," and his will was honored. The 3rd of December, 183 BC, marked the demise of Scipio Africanus, the eminent Roman general who was only 52 years old. Ironically, in the same year, his long-standing adversary, Hannibal Barca, also passed away on the other side of the Mediterranean. It was as if fate itself had decided to draw a line under the era of two titans, whose rivalry had determined the outcome of the Second Punic War. His body was laid to rest in Liternum, where a modest slab was placed on his tomb, a subject of lively debate among historians and archaeologists to this very day. And though the great warrior's ashes never returned to Rome, his deeds, his legacy, and his name endured forever in the memory of posterity. Scipio was not consigned to oblivion. He departed life as he had lived it, following his own convictions and principles. It was not Rome that predetermined his fate, but he himself who brought his biography to a close with the same unyielding resolve with which he had once taken up a sword and sworn allegiance to the Republic. The life story of Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus is a vivid testament to an undeniable truth. Great individuals often fail to fit within the frameworks of the very systems they help to preserve. Scipio crushed seemingly invincible enemies. He saved his homeland at its most critical juncture. He revolutionized military art. He elevated Rome's prestige to unprecedented heights. Yet, when his services were no longer deemed necessary by the ruling elite, he was sidelined and consigned to oblivion. The Rome he defended with his life turned out to be the very Rome that later accused him, persecuted him, and allowed him to die far from his native city. Thus, the Republic revealed its true colors: ungrateful, vulnerable, and consumed by envy of another's glory. It feared that Scipio was too great and powerful to fit within its strict laws and marble columns. But time puts everything in its proper place. Today, centuries later, few remember the names of the senators who condemned him. Yet the name of Africanus, the strategist who defeated Hannibal, the warrior who turned every battle into a lesson in courage and tactical mastery, the citizen who preferred exile to betraying his ideals, is known to all. Scipio embodies the paradox faced only by true titans. Scipio Africanus was a figure woven from contradictions. He was adored by the people, yet simultaneously instilled awe in those in power. His military triumphs did not always translate into political success. Despite brilliant victories in war, the political game often eluded him. However, his legacy did not fade into oblivion. His spirit lives on in tales of bravery, in strategies where intellect is valued above brute force, and in the memory that reminds us that true greatness requires not the trappings of power, but only truth. Scipio Africanus was not merely a general, but an embodiment of human potential, revealed through a blend of conviction, intellect, and courage. His life's journey serves as a reminder that even the most distinguished heroes can face betrayal from the very homeland they swore to serve. His story teaches us that true glory is defined not by titles or fleeting contemporary appraisals, but by the indelible mark an individual leaves upon the annals of history. For a people who forget the lessons of the past risk reliving its tragedies.